If I can save 50% of my irrigation water and still irrigate properly and thoroughly by having a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch, I'm in.
If you've been curious about fruit trees, but a little bit scared to get started, you've probably heard a name that I've said on this podcast many times, and that name is Tom Spellman. Tom is on the podcast today. Welcome to the show.
Kevin, I couldn't be happier to be here. You know, what you've done here in the last 3 to 4 years is fantastic. I really like your property and the efforts that you put into it. It's a really, really cool project.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when I first moved into this place, it was kind of Googling around to how to get started with an orchard, and it was your original videos from Dave Wilson Nursery, talking about that whole philosophy of backyard orchard culture. But I'm kind of curious for you, how did this all begin?
I've been in this pretty much all of my adult life, and even as a teenager. I started in the early 1970s, working for a small in-town retail nursery. I had an opportunity to go to work later on with Armstrong Nurseries in Ontario, California. At the time, they had a huge wholesale fruit tree and rose program that they were growing and selling retail and to other wholesalers. So I got to work with some early hybridizers and horticulturalists in production on growing that type of material. In 1981, I had an opportunity to go to work with Laverne Nursery. They're Southern California staple. They've been growing citrus, avocados, tropical fruits, subtropical fruits for many, many years. So I worked for them from 81 to 2001. And then this opportunity came along with Dave Wilson Nursery to become their Southwestern sales manager. As much as I love production, as much as I love hybridizing, I've always found that sales was where I really wanted to end up. So this has been a great position. It's been a dream job. I'm still aggressively working with them today and, selling fruit trees, shade trees, nut trees, all over the southwestern United States.
It's such a cool journey, and I think for a lot of the folks listening to this show, and certainly myself, I came to know you through this concept of backyard orchard culture, which I think when you look at just commercial orchard culture, obviously very far cry from what you would want to do in the backyard, but perhaps you could just explain the overall philosophy of backyard orchard culture and why it's kind of taken hold.
Sure, absolutely. So backyard orchard culture is mainly, it's a concept. Yeah. It's a concept of how to get more out of your own personal space. And the original concepts from Dave Wilson Nursery were put together by two very good friends of mine, Craig Miner and Ed Livo, who worked with the company back in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We're going to say it's new, but it's really not new. It's an ancient concept. People have been growing fruit trees on personal properties for thousands of years, and growing grapevines over a roof to give you shade, growing fig trees in a trellis row to give you a screen, using varieties for not only fruit production but for function as well. So backyard orchard culture incorporates that in, and the three main concepts of backyard orchard culture are all pretty simple. Number one, size control your trees so they're manageable for you. And I'm not the one that's going to tell you how big your peach tree should be or how big your avocado tree should be. Every individual grower needs to decide that for themselves. But what I will say is it's much easier to manage a small tree than it is to manage a big tree. And if you've ever tried to thin plums on a 15-foot plum tree, or keep the birds off of a 15-foot plum tree, you'll know that it's virtually impossible. So an 8-foot plum tree or a 7-foot plum tree, you can easily throw a bird net over. I can walk around and thin fruit in just a few minutes. I can do all of my pruning, all of my thinning, all of my harvesting from standing on the ground. Different size perspective for the amount of time that the fruit's going to hang on the tree. Size management, probably the number one most important concept. Number two, successive ripening. I don't want all my fruit at one time like a commercial grower. So I want to be able to go out and harvest a little bit of fruit out of my backyard all the time instead of a lot of fruit at any one given time. So looking for those varieties that ripen up all year long, varieties that'll ripen up, one in June, one in July, one in August, a couple in September, so that we've got those successive ripening harvest all through the summer, all through the fall. A third and most important concept is grow what you like and what you'll use, as well as what's adaptable to your area. So you want to consider adaptability, you want to consider whether you've got the right chill hours, whether you've got the right pollination benefits, whether, you know, it's a variety that you like to eat. It doesn't do you any good to grow fruit if you don't really have a use for it. So just considering those three concepts will make anybody a better backyard grower. You know, size control so it's manageable for you, grow what you like and what you'll use, grow successive ripening varieties so you have a little bit of fruit all the time.
That was the piece that helped me a lot, is realizing, because when you grow in, let's say, in an edible annual vegetable garden, and you're growing, maybe you have 2 tomatoes, you really do want as many tomatoes as you can get off of that particular annual, because it is an annual. You have that one season to grow it. And it changed my perspective when I heard you talk about the successive ripening, so much so that when I moved into this property, I built a spreadsheet of every fruit I even dreamed to grow, and then I mapped how those would ripen, and then I would shift varieties around. So I would, maybe there was 2 peaches I thought were really interesting, but they ripened at the exact same time. Well, I'd have to pick one, and then move, you know, that ripening window to pick a different one, like Ava's Pride or a Mid Pride out of Dave Wilson. Obviously, those are non-overlapping. And so if you were obsessed with peaches, I believe you guys have a 4-in-1, right? And you could have that one tree producing for, what is it, about 2 months or so, something like that?
Yeah, exactly. And Kevin, I compliment you. You did it right. You put it down on a piece of paper, you charted it out, you looked at your harvest times and you calendared it so that you weren't planning 3 varieties that ripen up in July, you know, and 4 varieties that ripen up in August, but you staggered it out through the season. Everybody should do that. Take that into consideration before you start digging holes and throwing trees in the ground, and you'll be much, much happier with your results in the long run.
But when it comes to actually planting those trees in the ground, you also kind of break some of the more classical rules of planting trees, right? At least when you consider it compared to commercial orchards.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, we're not looking at lining out our personal residential property like a commercial orchard. You know, I don't want to do that. I don't recommend that to anybody. You want to incorporate your landscape theme and your, you know, landscape needs into the trees that you're going to plant out into your garden. So you want to make sure that you're looking for all those other functions, you know, flower color, fragrance, fall colors, you know, function of the tree itself and how you place the tree and how you use the tree for something other than just fruit production. So probably the most important 2 considerations would be, how's your drainage? How does your soil drain? So you want to do some percolation tests. You want to dig some holes around your property. You want to fill those with water. You want to come back and check and see how long did it take to drain. If it drains out 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, great, perfect. If it takes an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, fair, good, not bad, good. If there's still water in the hole in the next morning, then you know you've got poor drainage. So those are areas where you need to make sure you're putting the right varieties into the right location so that they can take advantage of that. You know, we have rootstocks that'll take heavy wet soil. So you'd choose citation rootstock for your plum if you had poor drainage. Sure. You'd also plant on a rise, a little bit of a mound, so you get that root ball up above your native grade so that it can oxygenate a little bit and doesn't stagnate and become anaerobic from that water not being able to get away from the root ball. If you want a good quality sweet fruit, I want a sweet peach, I want a sweet navel orange, I want sweet mandarins, you know, those are going to pick up the ability to convert acids over to sugars by a lot of warmth and a lot of light exposure. So choose the sunniest areas on your property for fruit trees. If you're planting something that doesn't necessarily need to be sweet, a lemon, a lime, blueberries are a good candidate. They'll be sweet still, but you can put those in a little bit of shade. If I want to plant those varieties in an area that gets a little bit of morning shade or a little bit of afternoon shade, I can do that. 2 or 3 hours of shade in the morning, 2 or 3 hours of shade in the afternoon is going to take the harshest summer physical stress off the tree, and it's still going to give you a decent piece of fruit, but I'm putting a variety in there like a bare seedless lime, where I'm not really looking at developing sugars. I'm looking at growing a fruit for
that nice tart lime
acidic
flavor,
tart ability.
Yeah, we actually just made, I made some ice cream with the Bear's lime yesterday.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, like a little lime ice cream, which I'd never tried before, and it was the tartness I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so even though I think we harvested them full ripe, so they turn that sort of yellow-green color, which takes a little bit of that acidity out, I think, but regardless, it was still quite good. So sun exposure and drainage, and I'll speak to drainage in a second, but I do want to touch on the spacing, because to me that was the scariest part when I was putting in the citrus hedge, going 4 feet apart, knowing that even on dwarf or semi-dwarf rootstock, they still are going to want to get much larger than that. They'll crash into each other, so to speak.
Sure.
And getting, I guess, a little bit afraid of how that might play out. Are the roots going to compete with one another? Maybe we could touch on that, because I think that's perhaps the most nerve-wracking part of the backyard orchard culture is so-called cramming these trees together.
Right, right. Well, first of all, I looked at your citrus hedge, and I love it. You did a fantastic job. I use that exact model in workshops and lectures that I do all the time. What if I just wanted to plant a hedge? I wanted something that's going to be 8 feet tall and 2 or 3 or 4 feet wide, and I want it to be 40 feet long. I could go get any one of a number of common ornamental hedging plants and accomplish that in no time at all. But now if I choose citrus, I've got a plant that's every bit as adaptable as far as a hedge goes. I can sculpt it, I can prune it, I can grow it to 3 feet wide, I can grow it to 8 feet tall. I can plant them 4 feet apart and let them integrate together. And now, where I only wanted a screen, now I've got fragrant flowers in the springtime. I've got this beautiful sculptable green structure, and I've got 10 varieties of fruit. That's one of the things that backyard orchard culture is all about.
Yeah, and for me, I put it on the north side of my front yard, which is the most sort of suburban looking area, with the idea that, to your point about manageable height, getting it to maybe 7, 8 feet or so, no real more than that, and effectively blocking out the street view as I look in the front side of my garden. So it feels like I'm more contained than I really am, because we're just in a suburban, area here. And then being on that north side, obviously getting all that southern sun throughout the course of the day has really brought the sweetness out of, let's say, those satsumas that I've been growing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So it's really played out almost exactly as I thought, which was really cool to see. And then I wanted to touch on avocados just for a second to highlight the 2-in-1 or 3-in-1 or 4-in-1 whole method that you talk about a lot. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we planted the avocados kind of up on a mound, because we realized after killing a few that we think it was a drainage issue. They just seemed to not want to take as much clay as we might have here. So we planted them kind of up on a mound, put some burlap over, and they've taken, and we've also planted 2. So we did a Haas and a Fuerte, and put them, 2 feet apart, with this idea of kind of pruning out the interior and letting them grow as one big bush, which is just so close together. It just feels a bit foreign, I guess, for someone who's used to more traditional planting techniques, I guess.
So from a commercial grower's perspective, they'd never do that. You're going to individually space trees so that they have plenty of room. From a backyard grower's perspective, makes perfect sense. So now you've got a Haas and a Fuerte together. You've got type A and type B flowers, so you're going to get great overlapping, wonderful pollination between the two. You're going to get a winter, spring fruit from your Fuerte. You're going to get a spring, summer fruit from your Haas. So you've got now 7, 8, maybe 9 months worth of successive ripening avocados growing in the space where you would have just had one tree before. Mm-hmm. So you're going to structure that plant as it grows up and matures. It's going to look like a double trunk tree. Yeah. You're not going to have 2 individual canopies. You're going to allow those to intermingle a little bit and have just one nice big double structure. So that it's going to work out perfect. And if you were to throw Bacon or a Stewart or a Zutano in there as a third specimen, now you've got that fall season covered, and you've got successive ripening avocados 12 months out of the year.
That's the dream. I may actually have to retroactively add a third to get that year-round avocado. So the question I would have, and maybe many listening, is would the roots not compete? When you think about an annual veggie garden, there is a level of spacing you sort of have to respect, especially because you're usually planting different species together. And so if I'm cramming 3 avocados in a hole, won't all 3 of those roots want to fight for the same nutrients, or no?
That's a great question. And what we've found over the years is, as long as you're growing varieties that are compatible varieties, like all avocados are grafted onto an avocado rootstock, all citrus are going to be grafted onto a fairly compatible citrus rootstock, all peaches are going to be grown on the same similar type of rootstock. So what those plants do when they're planted in close spacing like that is within 2, 3, or 4 years, the root systems actually pleach together and grow together underground. So what you achieve from 3 or 4 individually planted specimens, you're going to get one mature growing specimen that's all one living unit.
So the roots sort of complement one another in a way.
The roots sort of complement each other, will grow together. And so then what you want to do to manage that combination is you want to always manage your more vigorous varieties. Okay. So if I get one peach that grows out 6 feet one year and another that only grows out 2 feet, I'm going to manage that 6-foot tree and bring it back down into perspective with the weaker variety. Sure. So that I'm never letting any one variety dominate the combination. If I have a 3-in-1, all 3 varieties get exactly 1/3 of that combo. If I have a 4-in-1, all 4 varieties get exactly 25% of that combination. You don't want any one to dominate or you'll start to lose the weaker varieties.
Right, then you're sort of negating the whole reason you did it in the first place.
Exactly.
Backyard orchard culture, Dave Wilson Nursery, we've talked a lot about what it is, some basic rules of thumb. I thought maybe we could dive into some specific types of fruit trees, starting with this whole category of stone fruits, and maybe just defining what makes a stone fruit a stone fruit.
So stone fruit are generally in the parent classification that we call prunus. So we've got peach, we've got nectarine, which is just a peach that's been hybridized not to have fuzz.
Okay.
We have apricots, we have plums, we have cherries, and then an almond. The almond, the nut, is also in the same general family as all those other prunus.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that.
So the one thing they all have in common is they have a single seed that we call the stone. So the name stone fruit comes from the fact that they just have that one centrally located single seed.
Got it.
And those all fit into a category that is very diverse. We have varieties that ripen up from the end of April all the way up until October. We have some interspecifics that have been hybridized off of those. Pluots, for example, are interspecific hybrids between plum and apricot. Apriums are the reverse cross. They're interspecific hybrids with an apricot as the maternal parent and the plum as the contributing pollinator.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
We have nectoplums that are nectarine plum hybrids. We have peach plums. We have all kinds of interspecifics that have developed off of that category. And people sometimes think, well, those are genetically altered, but they're not. They're not genetically altered. There's nothing in those crosses that wouldn't be there had the trees had an opportunity to overlap in nature. So if a plum was growing next to an apricot in nature, they can naturally cross-pollinate with each other, and the seedlings from those 2 trees can be crosses between the 2.
Yeah, it's much like when we talk about in vegetable culture, this idea of the F1 hybrid.
Exactly.
And a lot of people confuse that sometimes with a GMO, so-called.
Right.
And it's only a GMO in the sense that, when species reproduce, the genetics are modified, right?
Right.
In a more natural sense. There's no, sort of trans species crossing that would require like scientific intervention in that way.
No, nothing is incorporated into that hybridization, like I said, that wouldn't be there naturally had they had the opportunity to overlap in nature.
Just they wouldn't often have that opportunity.
The only thing the hybridizer is doing is speeding up that process.
Right.
And then we're able to grow those seedlings on, evaluate those for their individual characteristics, make new selections. And when you say like a tomato is an F1 hybrid, an F1 hybrid is a simple cross, one variety with another variety. Well, some of the interspecifics that we're introducing are F4, F5, F6. They've been grown through and rehybridized several times to incorporate other characteristics, whether it's a smaller seed, an earlier ripening season, a later ripening season, specific flower type. There's all kinds of reasons that they'll incorporate something else into a cross and then reintroduce it. So, we have the opportunity now to have 60 years worth of hybridization under our belts through the introductions that Zager Hybrids in Modesto has allowed us to produce, and we've got some fantastic varieties. So those are all included in that stone fruit or prunus category.
So if we bring it back down to the basics and just say someone wants to grow an apricot, a nectarine, a peach, what do they need to know that we haven't already talked about this week about its care?
The first two things you want to look at: is the variety adaptable to my climate? Is it a variety where I'm going to accumulate enough winter chill hours for it to bloom well and set a good crop of fruit? Is it a variety that will take a late frost in a cold area? So, and we have varieties that we've introduced over the years that have all different requirements for accumulation of chill hours, from 100 up to 1,000. So, you know, we have varieties that will adapt all over the country. The next most important consideration is, what rootstock is that tree grafted onto? Every one of those trees is two components. It's a root, which is the heartbeat or the motor of that plant. It's going to give you the nutrient uptake and the irrigation uptake and the flow up into the structure of the tree so that the tree can do its work through the growing season. So we use for apple varieties or for peach varieties or plum varieties sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7 different rootstocks that could be adaptable to different geographic areas in the country. So if I'm selling a peach tree to a nursery in San Diego, I'm going to give them a peach tree that's low chill adaptable, 100, 150, 200 chill hours. I'm going to give them a variety that's grafted onto a rootstock that will take our warmer Southern California climates and our sandier soils that we have here close to the coast. So if I'm selling a tree to somebody in Denver, Colorado, and they want a peach tree, it's going to be a variety that blooms later. It's going to be a variety that takes a different amount of chilling hours. It's going to be on a variety of rootstock that's more adaptable to their climate than a Southern California climate. So you not only want to understand your cultivars, you want to understand the root system that they're grafted onto. So doing that homework up front, making sure you've got the right variety on the right rootstock, will equate to success.
So let me bring a couple terms to the forefront here. First, you have this concept of the chill hours. So that is an accumulation of time, hours, under about 45 degrees Fahrenheit or so, that if a tree does not experience that during its winter dormancy, it struggles to produce that next year, right?
Yes, it could mean that the tree doesn't go into a good natural dormancy.
Okay.
So if I say planted a peach variety that requires 800 chill hours in San Diego, where you get an average of maybe 200, then that variety is not going to get a good sleep during the winter. So it's not necessarily going to wake up with the vim and vigor that you want it to, where it gives you a good bloom set and gives you a good fruit set. You could still get a small crop of fruit from it, but it's not going to be anything that a commercial grower would accept or anything that a homeowner would want to have to deal with. We want to make sure we're growing the adaptable varieties so that we get a decent set for our climate and our soil type.
Not really worth the effort if you can't accumulate the chill hours. So then the next piece that I want to express, and tell me if I'm accurate, just to paint a picture of how these trees really work, is you have your rootstock, which, like you mentioned, it's a different genetics than what is actually above, which is then grafted on. So every tree is sort of two genetics in one.
Yes.
And what you can do is you can select sort of under the soil with one of, sounds like about 6 or 7 different rootstocks for peaches or stone fruits. And then of course you have what you're grafting on as well. Yes. And so you have a selection there of 4, 5, 6 on top of that. So just with what, a half dozen of rootstock and a half dozen of top graft material, you can create quite a few different combinations of, quote, trees, which really hybrid species of trees put together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think that's probably what can confuse a lot of beginner growers, because when you think about growing a peach, you're like, well, isn't there just one peach? And the truth is, not only is there not just one above the ground, there's multiple below as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got the dwarving characteristics, right? Maybe we could talk about that for a second.
That paying attention to that adaptability is extremely important, and that's why I always recommend deal with a retail nursery or garden center that you trust, somebody that is a professional in that business that understands what's going to grow right in your area. Now, not that long ago, I walked into an unnamed large chain store, and in their garden department, and this was in Long Beach, California, which is a very similar climate to what you have right here. They had Bing cherry trees. And I thought, okay, you're in Long Beach, you got 200 chill hours here. Bing cherry trees require 700 to 800. So everybody that buys a Bing cherry tree and plants it in Long Beach is going to fail. Because number one, they didn't do their homework, and neither did the retailer.
Shouldn't even be in the store.
Shouldn't even be in the store.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just setting them up for failure. And we've talked about with orcharding, it's a long failure. It's not like you just failed to grow the lettuce.
The tree may grow for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, and you're going to say every year, I didn't get any fruit. Why didn't I get any fruit?
You think you're doing something wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just the genetics of the tree can't.
Selecting those right varieties is extremely important. And then, understanding your chill in your particular area. So what, the main concepts, the Western model for accumulation of chill hours that we like to go by, runs from November 1 until January 31. Sometimes, if it stays cooler, you can get another couple weeks or 3 weeks. Last year, we probably had an extra 3 weeks chill accumulation out of that we didn't have in a normal year. So you got about a 90 to 120 day accumulation period. We're accumulating hours that are between the freezing level, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, up to about 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So what we want to do is we want to understand how many hours in between those two numbers did we have in that 90 to 120 day period. And then if we had daytime hours that were above 70 degrees, theoretically we should subtract those from that accumulation.
I see, because it's getting too hot in the day.
Right.
Yeah.
So in my area, in a normal year, I get about 250 to 300 chill hours. Last year, I had about 650.
Wow.
So, we had a much longer period of accumulation, and we had virtually no hours above 70 within that 90-day period.
Wow.
And this year, it's only been the last couple of days that we've even had a 70. So we're going to have a pretty good, solid accumulation of chill for this year as well.
Let's dive into citrus. This is the one I have, I would say, the most experience with, but even then it's only about 3-4 years of growing. So it's not a lot compared to someone like yourself.
In one way or another, involved in the citrus industry and the citrus nursery industry for well over 40 years. And I have quite a collection of my own. And I will honestly say I eat some citrus every single day. Yeah. So you've got such a diversification of varieties. You have oranges, and you've got summer varieties, winter varieties. You have mandarins. You've got varieties that ripen up over a very long period of time. You can grow 3 or 4 successive ripening mandarins and have fruit from November all the way through mid to late summer. In fact, almost every year I get an opportunity with my gold nugget or tango mandarin where I can eat the last fruit or couple of fruit on the tree right around Thanksgiving Day, and I can also pick my very first Satsuma mandarin or Kishu. So, with the few varieties that I have, I pretty much have 12 months worth of successive ripening mandarins. That is fantastic.
It's hard to beat.
You've got grapefruit, you've got ruby types, you've got white types, you've got sweet types like Oro Blanco, you've got winter varieties and summer varieties. You have sour fruits like lemons and limes. You've got Meyer lemon, which is less acidic. You've got Eurekas and Lisbons that are the true market sour lemons. You've got Mexican lime, bear seedless lime, Rangpur lime, your Australian fingered lime, which is a little bit different. It's not really used for juice. It's used more for, the accents and the little flavor accentuations that you're going to get with it. So we've got all these different varieties that fit into that classification, and I can't get enough. I mean,
I'm obsessed. I think it's fair to say I'm obsessed. How many varieties do you think you have in your yard?
I think just citrus alone, I probably have 25 different varieties.
Oh,
maybe
so you're double me.
26 or 27.
Yeah. I would love to expand. I mean, frankly, I can see it as I look out right now, and I see some Bear's limes hitting the floor. So I need to make use of them a little bit more because we're finally kicking into gear here. Yeah. It's been 2 or 3 years, so I'm finally starting to see what you're mentioning, where you do have something more or less every month out of the year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if someone wants to start with citrus, it's vast. Like you mentioned, like what varieties are good go-tos, obviously keeping in mind that everyone's climate and conditions are different.
Then, you probably want a good lemon. You probably want a summer orange and a winter orange, so a Valencia type and a navel type. We've got some nice new selections in the navel world that have been out 8, 10, 12 years now. One of my favorites has become Cara Cara, pink navel orange.
That one is incredibly delicious.
Yeah, wonderful flavor, great accent color. It's just a really nice variety. So you've got blood oranges that are, true dark red pigmentation, very high antioxidant and phytonutrient value, and those are typically winter into spring ripening. You've got the grapefruits and the pomelos, Oro Blancos for wintertime, the ruby types for the summertime. You've got different types of pomelos that ripen up anywhere between February and June. So, there's such a great selection of all these different varieties. You can get really, really unique with some of the oddities, or you can just grow basic commodity varieties just to have, juice fruit and fresh eating fruit on a year-round basis. But
I'd say if I had, and this is just my hot take here, if I had to pick 2 oranges, I'd probably go the Cara Cara and maybe a Valencia. Then I have my juice and my eater, and then I'd do a Bear's Lime for the productivity alone. It's just so productive. I like a Meyer lemon. I like a little more of that sweetness than the acidity. Makes a good ice cream. Apparently I'm obsessed with making citrus-based ice creams. Does the rootstock matter as much with citrus as maybe something like a stone fruit or an apple or something like that? Is it as important?
We've used a whole diversification of rootstocks for citrus over the years, and the main considerations now are more for dwarfing. So you've got the trifolia types, the Ponceris rubidus and Pomeroys and varieties like that that'll give you a tree that's probably going to mature out about 2/3 the size of a standard. So people say, well, a 20-foot standard is going to be a 14-foot or 13-foot semi-dwarf. That's still bigger than what I want. But what you have to remember is you can keep that tree maintained to any size you want by pruning. So, my citrus hedge that's been in since the 1980s, I keep it 8 feet tall. I don't let it get any bigger than that. So regardless of the rootstock that it's on, you're always going to be in control with your pruning shears as far as keeping that tree sculpted or keeping it to any manageable size that you want.
Like I mentioned a couple episodes ago, I had made this spreadsheet and I knew the varieties I wanted and I was sort of hunting those down, and I could not find some of those varieties on, let's say, a dwarf or a semi-dwarf. Some of them I just bought on standard because it's what I had. And the logic was, well, I can just summer prune it or keep that canopy down. So would you say that, let's just make an example up. Let's say there's a standardized rootstock. That's the only one I could find, but perhaps it was really good for heavy clay soil, which I have a little bit more clay here. You'd rather choose a rootstock with a benefit like that than perhaps one that is exactly the height modifier that you want, right? Because you're pruning it.
100%,
okay,
Kevin.
Okay.
You, again, like we talked about rootstocks for prunus, you want your rootstocks for your citrus to be compatible to your geography, your soil type, and your climate. So those trifoliate rootstocks are very adaptable to heavy type soils. They don't have a problem with that at all. But citrus is most of the citrus rootstocks are very compatible. So you can grow a standard together with a semi-dwarf, and they're going to grow just fine together. Another consideration is if I'm comparing a standard to a dwarf or a semi-dwarf, what's the ultimate size of the parent? So if I'm growing a Nagami kumquat on a standard rootstock next to Lisbon lemon on a semi-dwarfing rootstock, Nagami kumquat is still always going to be smaller than that dwarf Lisbon lemon.
Right.
Because the variety within itself doesn't get that big. So you have all these different growth patterns within the category of citrus, and no matter what rootstock you choose, so something like a Nagami kumquat, I wanted a vigorous rootstock, so that I can get some size.
Yeah, exactly.
Where on the lemon, I can grow it on a dwarfing rootstock, and I'm still going to get a 12, 14, 15 foot tree.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess not all plants obviously are created equal with their terminal heights.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, well let's turn to pruning. I mean, citrus, why is it so good as a hedge is because it does not actually lose its leaves in the wintertime. And so when we talk citrus pruning, my understanding has always been you're controlling the height, and you're sort of shaping, and you can do that, sounds like anytime you want almost, and then you're trying to keep it more in this bushy format and protect that trunk relative to maybe that more open vase style structure you might want on these stone fruit. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I like to do with my full-size citrus, you know, a Eureka lemon, a navel orange, a Oro Blanco grapefruit that are 10 feet wide and, you know, 10 feet tall, is I'm never going to take that whole center out. I'm never going to open that up so that you get full light exposure. But I'm going to do what we call lace pruning, which means I'm going to take out a branch here and a branch there and a branch there and a branch there, so that I open up a dappled light exposure, so that when I look at the pattern that the sun shines through that tree, I see little spots of light on the ground incorporated with little spots of shade. That way you don't have any area that's going to be physically stressed by sun damage. If I open up the whole center of that Eureka lemon tree, and now I've opened up all that interior growth to the full blast of the hot afternoon summer sun, I'm going to get sunburn. I'm going to have to come in and whitewash that whole interior structure. But if I just make sporadic cuts and take out little windows here and there, the sun's going to keep moving. I'm never going to have too long of an exposure on any part of the interior of that tree.
Does the pruning change at all, or is it mostly still like shape, the lace pruning, and then just sort of let it fruit as it does?
Yeah, and it's going to depend a lot on structure. I have quite a few citrus that are espaliered.
Okay.
So, you know, they're only this wide, and they're, you know, 8 feet by 6 or 7 feet tall, and growing up against the south wall or a west wall or somewhere where I didn't have room for a full-size tree, but I wanted to incorporate those varieties into my collection. So, and on those, I'm getting anywhere from maybe 50 to 100 pieces of fruit per year. So that's plenty for me. I don't need 500 fruit off of any one of my
Probably
trees.
looks really cool too when it's
it gives
going,
you a nice shape and a nice structure that's easily manageable. So I'm not really going to dapple prune that. I'm just going to kind of keep that pruned to shape. So I'm going to make little cuts 3-4 times a year where you get something that grows out of balance, just take and cut that off. So the bigger trees, the fuller, mature size trees, that's where I can walk up underneath the tree. I've got a canopy where I can, you know, go up and harvest fruit or do some pruning. You're always going to get some dead wood. Citrus is notorious as it expands out and grows over itself. You're going to get little bits of dead wood that are down in the interior where they're now in too dense a shade. So I'm always taking that dead wood out, and then always looking for areas where I can just open it up a little bit just to get some light exposure through that tree so that I can see that speckled sunlight pattern on the ground in the interior.
When we are talking about getting your very first backyard orchard off to the races, there's an undervalued piece to the puzzle that is mulching. And we have Tom Spellman on the show. What do we need to know, Tom, about mulching?
I think there's nothing you can do that is going to be better off for your garden than having a good, solid 2 to 4 inch layer of biodiverse mulch on the ground. The 4 main reasons, and these are what I use in my workshops and lectures all the time. Number 1, a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch will give you a temperature reduction during the summer months on that topsoil of about 10 to 15 degrees. So during the months of July, August, September, when soil temperatures could absolutely get up into the 90s, you're keeping them down into the mid or high 70s. So that almost eliminates any physical stress. That almost eliminates any physical stress that you could have on those trees through that hot summer season. And that's huge. If that was the only reason to mulch, I would be an advocate. Number 2, it's proven fact in many mulching studies that have been done by the UC system, by Cal Poly's studies that have been done all over the southwestern United States, a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch will make better use of your irrigation water by 50%. So if I can save 50% of my irrigation water and still irrigate properly and thoroughly by having a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch, I'm in. So I think number 3 could very well be the most important. You know, if you are out in nature, walk out into a forest, walk out into a jungle. I've toured some natural avocado groves years ago, and when you walk out into a natural avocado grove, you sink to your knees up into the leaf litter that's under those trees. They're gigantic, big beautiful trees. You know, you and I couldn't touch arms around the trunks of the trees, and they're 100 feet tall and just spectacular. And that mulch layer is alive. You scratch through that mulch layer and you get down to the soil surface, and you have all these white feeder roots that are growing right out of the soil and into that decomposing leaf litter, and that's where they're taking the majority of their irrigation and their nutrients from. So it creates a bioactive environment. You have natural mycorrhizal fungi activity that gets started. You have beneficial insects and other elements in that mulch layer that help to break down things in a more natural form to make them readily available for the trees to take up and use.
Our final reason, we have biodiversity, we have the sort of the soil life, and then our fourth reason for mulching.
So if I ask you this question, what's the worst chore in your landscape?
The worst chore is weeding.
2 to 4 inch layer of mulch on your soil surface will keep the natural germination of weed seeds down by 80 to 90%. So if I can eliminate 80 to 90% of my weeding just by having a nice mulch layer there, I'm in. So those are the 4 reasons that I like a good biodynamic mulch layer. And there's reasons to be cautious. Are you in an area that's prone to fires? Now, I am. I'm in an area that's very close to where wildfires occur on a regular basis. So I keep my mulch layer 3 feet away from anything that's flammable, 3 feet away from a garden shed that's wood siding, 3 feet away from my firewood pile. You know, anything that I think could potentially become burnable due to a mulch fire, I just keep that pulled away. But mulch doesn't ignite. It smolders like a cigar. So if you, and I've watched this, experienced this many times. If you get embers, hot embers that come in and land on your mulch layer, it just creates kind of a gray patch that'll expand out little by little, but it doesn't ignite. It doesn't produce flames. So it's very easily controllable. So as long as anything that's flammable is away from your mulch layer by a couple of feet or 3 feet, you shouldn't have any trouble with it. So, and I think I think biodiversity is the key. You know, I would never use all redwood or all cedar or all eucalyptus or all olive or anything like that. But a combination of all those things together, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 different types of ground wood product will give you a great mulch, you know, but you don't have anything in there to a toxicity. If I use all redwood, I could build up a tannic acid toxicity in my soil. But if I had 10% redwood, I'm never going to see that. So I want to incorporate some stable rakings or what comes out of the chicken coop, or I want to put some pine needles in there. That's all fine at small percentages. 10%, 15% of anything final volume will just help to increase the biodiversity of that mulch layer.
So mulching is exceptionally important in a backyard orchard, in the annual vegetable garden, just in general, and some really fantastic suggestions from Tom. It's been awesome having you on the show. If people want to get in touch with you, I will put all of your information in every single podcast description of this week, but it truly has been an honor having you on the show.
Well, Kevin, I can't thank you enough for having me today. It's been a pleasure working with you. I love your project, and you know, this is what I like to promote, and this is where I like to be. Thank you very much for having me.